There have been hundreds of cases of UFO encounters where people have been cured of illnesses and diseases ranging from the basic common cold, cancer, and recovering from injuries. Some of these cases were verified by UFO investigators, doctors, and other officials who found it difficult to accept the fact that some of these people had been cured of a disease or recovered from an accident that science had no known cure or treatment for. The following are 3 incredible stories of people who encountered aliens and were either healed or miraculously recovered from injuries. Number 3. Chris Bledsoe. Chris Bledsoe was a commercial pilot who also had his own business, but found life difficult due to ill health. He suffered from an incurable condition called Crohn's disease, which he'd had for 15 years, and found life extremely painful. On the evening of January the 8th, 2007, Chris went fishing with his 7-year-old son, Chris Jr., and 5 workmates, and on that particular evening was not feeling too good and decided to go off hunting by himself, whilst his son and the other men stayed at the lake fishing. As the sun was setting, he came upon an open field and suddenly encountered 2 round objects the size of a bus sitting about 100 feet above the trees. He described the colour of the objects as orange liquid fire, and being a pilot, he said they were certainly not of this world. His emotions were of deep, deep fear, and up until that moment, he had never ever thought of UFOs, and they had never ever entered his vocabulary. At this stage, he had become so frightened that he'd squatted down to avoid detection. Chris looked around for any means of escape, but as he looked back up, the sky appeared to open up like a zip, and then a 3rd object had joined the other 2, and at that very moment he knew that he'd been seen by them. He was now so fearful that he suddenly found himself running, and eventually made his way back to the other men and proceeded to tell them what he'd just experienced. His friends claimed that they'd been looking for him for hours, but to Chris, he felt it only been gone for about 20 minutes. He later found that he'd been missing for 4 hours. Chris asked where his son Chris Jr. was, and his friends said that he'd gone out looking for him. Chris then went in search of him and eventually found him in a panicked state, where he too had experienced unusual happenings. His son claims to have come upon 2 small beings who appeared to be red and glowing, wearing what looked like swimming goggles, and were about 3 feet tall. His son claims that as he was observing the aliens picking up cans and bottles, they suddenly spotted him. Then one of the aliens just stared at him, whereupon Chris Jr. suddenly became paralysed. He could not even scream. He claims his paralysis had stopped when the aliens must have seen the headlights of his father's truck. Chris and his son then made their way back to the other men, where everyone appeared wide-eyed and shocked. Suddenly, one of the men looked up and shouted that the sky was now full of at least 9 round objects, all slowly manoeuvring around each other, and then 3 of the objects landed on the other side of the river. Pandemonium had now set in as they all raced towards the truck. Chris was driving as fast as he could, with the other men screaming, "Go, go, go!" Suddenly, one of the men looked up and shouted that the sky was now full of at least 9 round objects, all slowly manoeuvring around each other, and then 3 of the objects landed on the other side of the river. Pandemonium had now set in as they all raced towards the truck. Chris was driving as fast as he could, with the other men screaming, "Go, go, go!" One of the men looked at the back and saw the terrifying sight of one of the small beings chasing them on all 4s. The truck then came upon the field where Chris had originally encountered the objects and suddenly slammed on the brakes. They were now observing 2 fiery objects sitting above the trees. They were so terrified they all thought the world was coming to an end. One of the egg-shaped crafts came towards them and was floating above the truck. The object was totally silent and then shot off into the sky. Chris drove home at full speed. This strange story did not end there. In the weeks that followed, they all started to experience strange events in their homes, seeing shadowy figures darting around the room and walking through walls, and Chris would hear footsteps running in the attic. After the incident, the other man went silent, and Chris had trouble trying to communicate his experience to his wife. Meanwhile, his son remained traumatized by the whole event. For the next year, Chris kept the whole incident to himself and suffered depression. The strangest thing was that ever since that night, when he had lost 4 hours of his life and had obviously been abducted, he no longer suffered from Crohn's disease, which he'd had for so many years. It had completely gone. Number 2. Dr. Fred Bell. In 1971 in Southern California, Dr. Fred Bell and 2 of his friends were the victims of a bomb explosion. All 3 were injured, where Dr. Bell was thrown off his feet and lost consciousness. He was rushed to Laguna Memorial Hospital. When he awoke, he discovered that his left hand, upper left shoulder and neck were badly burned. He also sustained a minor skull fracture and many painful bruises all over his body. What is unusual about this case is that Bell claims to have been in contact with human-looking aliens since childhood, called Pleiadians, and this had continued throughout his life. Bell claimed that they had always assisted him throughout his life with warnings and advice. At one time, they gave him a necklace called a receptor, which they said would protect him. While he was lying battered and bruised in hospital, he felt the necklace start to heat up and sent an energy throughout his whole body, and within minutes, he was completely healed. It was shortly after this event that he was visited by friends who watched in total amazement as he slowly removed his bandages, revealing no wounds. He was totally healed. The hospital physicians ran tests over his body but could find no answer to his miraculous cure. One of the physicians said, "This is impossible. You have no trace of the severe burns that had damaged your left hand, upper left shoulder and your neck. There is no longer evidence of a skull fracture, and your bruises have gone. How did this happen?" Because of the sudden and miraculous healing, the doctor then accused Bell of faking his injuries. Bell was now in perfect health and was released from hospital. Bell did not dare tell the doctors about the necklace, which had somehow cured him with its unknown energy. Number 1. Howard Menger. Ever since he was a little boy, Menger had had regular contact with aliens who claimed they were from various planets in the solar system, and in some cases came from different vibratory planes. Over the years, Menger claims to have had a lot of contact with aliens. He was even taken aboard a UFO and given a tour of the moon. He was told many predictions which later came true. Menger also claimed to have received a healing from the aliens. In April 1945, Howard Menger was a soldier during World War II and was on the Pacific island of Okinawa in the Pacific Ocean. After American warplanes had bombed the island, the American infantry were unable to take control. It was during this period when Menger was seriously wounded. As he was patrolling the airstrip, a shell from a nearby island landed on the airstrip. Menger then fell to the ground for protection. After the explosion, he thought he had escaped injury, but then felt something stinging in his right eye. He then put his hand to his eye and pulled out a piece of shrapnel. Although he received prompt medical treatment, his eye became badly infected and he lost sight of his right eye. Unfortunately, Menger's eye infection was so severe, it quickly spread to his other eye, and Menger was now totally blind in both eyes. It was at this low moment in his life that something happened in the hospital tent, where he was visited by an unidentified lady. Menger asked if she was a nurse, but she didn't reply, and told him that he was the one she had come to see. and was amazed that she seemed to know a good deal about him, and assured him that his sight would be restored. It was at this time that Menga felt that she was one of his extraterrestrial friends and was sent to help him. Gradually, Menga's sight returned, and he miraculously regained his sight. He was also able to see the woman who had come to assist him, and saw an attractive woman dressed in an army nurse's uniform. And although she had helped him greatly, she never made herself known directly. The nurse did however say to Menga that he would later meet someone very important. And a short time later, he had a strong urge to drive to a remote area of the island, where he met a human-looking extraterrestrial who told him that a terrible bomb would shortly be dropped. She was talking about the bombs that would hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The alien told him that we have been spending a lot of time healing and conditioning you and preparing you for your work to come. Howard Menga went on to write books and died in 2009, aged 87.